Welcome to the Body Smart Podcast, where we remove roadblocks to fitness and health to empower you to master your health habits. We help you become body smart. So it'll just be Phil and I today. Cameron did rim to rim to rim in the Grand Canyon, so they should be headed back by now. Sure. Anyway,
Yeah.
haven't found out if he survived or yet, so we'll know by tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I heard from him last night, but I haven't heard from him today, so up in the air.
Who knows? Anything
Yeah.
could happen. So tonight's topic is staying hydrated as we age. Hold on, let me open up the chat. Okay. So there was Peter Attia, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's a physician specializing in longevity. Wrote an article recently about aging and hydration, and this is something that I hadn't known much about. Do you want to introduce that article a little bit, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Peter Attia essentially talks about in this article is, first off, he really goes over the normal consequences of dehydration for mild dehydration that a lot of us walk around with most of the day, but we don't really realize it. And so, like, some of those consequences or symptoms kind of feels like dizziness, fatigue, confusion, and some lower blood pressure. And then on the severe end, dehydration can really cause kidney damage, high blood pressure, and then in really, really severe cases, some increased risk of clotting. But what Pia Tia really talks about in this article too is how in the aging population or older adults, they're at a way higher risk of walking around dehydrated for a bunch of different reasons. And I'm sure we're going to touch on a little bit of everything here, but one of them being that older adults have a significantly lessened thirst response. So if you think about it, our hydration levels really just depend on our input and output of fluids. So our input mechanisms are essentially our thirst. So when we're thirsty, we drink water. That's typically how it works as we're younger and we're high functioning. And then our output, or getting rid of the waters and the fluids, is through sweat, urine, and then respiration or breathing. However, Peter Tia in this article highlights this really awesome study that was done in 1981 that I really liked. I'd never heard of this article before, this study before, so I'll highlight that real quickly. Try not to steal all your thunder, Mark,
All good.
for it. But he did this study. Highlighted this study done in 1981 that compared thirst in men in age groups of 75 to 67, and then another group of 20 to 31. And these two groups of men went under a water deprivation period, essentially where they just didn't drink. And the results of that study found that the older group of men reported significantly less thirst and consumed significantly less water. And because of that, they exhibited much higher levels of dehydration. So I thought that was a really interesting article that he touched on, even though these two groups of men, really the only difference in factors was just their age. I mean, they went under water deprivation for the exact same amount of time. So,
which is wild, right? And the reason that I especially like this article, because Cameron always rags on me for not drinking enough, and I don't. Which here we go. There we go. Drink some water on air to go towards that goal. So Cameron, it's hilarious. He has all over the clinic. He has water bottles. Phil can attest to this too. There's like at least one in every room, and he goes through it.
Yeah, no, that is the truth.
Real quick. And he chronically has to pee. So, and I can rag on him because he's not here. And that is something that I don't do because I hate having to pee. But it's a problem regardless of age. And part of the issue is that the habits that we establish when we're younger it's much easier to carry those over to when we're older. And so, if when we're in our younger years, when we can kind of absorb more of that, if we're in the habit of not drinking enough, that typically gets more severe as we age. And so, one of the other things that he talks about in this article is that as we lose muscle mass, that also decreases the amount of water that we have in our body and our cells, right? So, muscle has a lot of water with it. And so, when we lose muscle mass, we actually lose part of our total body water, which means that when we're dehydrated, there's less water available to kind of balance that out, right? When we're younger, healthier, we have more muscle mass, then it's easier to do this. And I can't remember, I got to find the specific study this was from, but it was talking about losing water as a percentage of body weight, right? And so, and like, what would that mean for decrease in performance? And at about 2.5% of body weight loss through water, performance starts dropping rapidly. Much more 3, 4, 5%. By the way, how many of you, how many of you drop one in the chat if you feel like you get enough water throughout the day, throughout the week? Drop a 2 if you don't. I'm a 2 for sure. I do not get enough water. I just want to see, and if you are a 1, I want to know like what helps you drink enough water. What are the habits? And then if you're a 2, what keeps you from drinking water throughout the day? I'm really interested to know. Because like I said, my main one is I hate having to pee, and it's hilarious because on the days that I do get enough water, I actually feel amazing, right? I feel incredible. I think that's most of us, right? Because our performance is better. The thing that this other study I was referencing earlier with percentages of body weight lost in water is if our cells aren't hydrated, especially our muscle cells, they can't contract, right? And so, like Phil said, in a little bit of dehydration, that typically means a drop in performance, right? We won't be able to run as fast, or we'll lose some strength. But on the higher end, right? If it's our heart muscle that's not contracting, right? Then that causes major problems, right? I literally choke on water. Oh, that's hilarious. So I'm with you. I actually a confession. This is not water. This is flavored water. I dropped some mayo in here because it's the only way I can get myself to drink at least a little bit more water throughout the day because it's flavored. So I want to know and Phil, let me know what you've heard. What have people heard about how much water we should drink a day? Any thoughts? What have you heard about that, Phil?
Yeah, so I've heard the pretty stereotypical things. I think that a lot of other people have heard is like, oh, the 1 gallon a day is like the gold standard of the amount of water that you drink. However, I was reading an article recently, I think a week and a half ago, which is kind of funny that we ended up using this topic for this call. Was I was reading this article about how people are light or heavy sweaters and what that means for the amount of water that they should be drinking and like the electrolytes they should be adding into their consumption. And so like me personally, like I'm a heavy sweater. So like I found out that I have to drink way more just to stay kind of on par and keep myself feeling somewhat like a human being comparative to like another person who doesn't really sweat that much. They don't have to drink as much and they don't have to bring in as much electrolytes. So I think that is something that's not talked about a lot. But in regards to the information that's out there, it's pretty limited. Even in PT school, it wasn't something that's talked about a ton. It's the very stereotypical, like, oh, a gallon a day, that should do ya. But I think that's very different, person to person.
Which is crazy when you consider that we're like 60 to 70% water, right? Like,
Yeah.
you think that's like, oh yeah, I know about hydration. And so yeah, there's some like rules of thumb. You'll see a gallon of water. One of the typical ones is like half your body weight in ounces. And so those can be a good rule of thumb. But Phil mentioned something crucial, is that like there's other, like, depending on your sweat rate, right? If you sweat more, you're going to need to drink more, and you also lose electrolytes. And so this is one of the really important things, and I think most of us know this to a degree, right? It's like, oh, I gotta gotta have those electrolytes. Um, but you know what we need to replace is sweat, right? When we sweat, we get water and then different electrolytes like sodium, potassium, some magnesium, some chlorine. And so all of that's coming out. And so if we just drink back water alone, just pure water alone, then we're actually not going to get everything that we need that our body already sweat out, right? We've got to replenish that. And so that's super important. What Phil said is not just the water, but also making sure that we're getting some of those electrolytes back as well to keep our systems balanced. And so just remember that, right? What I not that you didn't drink anyone else's sweat, but kind of like that combination of things. And so this is a really interesting thing is, kind of our common thirst quenchers, right? You see like Gatorade, Powerade, and incidentally, those actually aren't the greatest for hydration. They they often have too much sugar and then too little sodium and potassium. We actually need a little bit more. And so there, I'll have to drop this. I don't know where I put the little. Let's see if I can find this real quick. Um, oh, no, put that. Okay, never mind. I'll post that in here later. But it talked about some different drinks that we can do to stay a little bit better hydrated and to replace some of those electrolytes. And so this is actually surprising. So like I said, Gatorade, Powerade, not as great. Typically too much sugar and too little of those other things. Milk actually ended up being one of the best all around. So it's got some sodium, it's got some potassium, it's got some magnesium, and then it's got some natural sugars. And so that actually works really well for getting us hydrated after we've exercised, after we've moved around. Um, Other things are I don't know if you've seen like what's that called? Element. Have you tried that at all, Phil?
Yes, that one's really popular now. And then Morden, I think, is what it's called. It's spelled funky though. Those are two really popular brands that's really come on the scene as like the hydration gurus now that are trying to surpass Gatorade and all that because they advertise, hey, we have the exact right amount of sodium, potassium, magnesium, and all these other important micronutrients. But yeah, I haven't tried it though. I don't know. I'm kind of suspicious about a lot of the supplements out there, just because sometimes you don't really know what you're getting. But yeah,
Right. No, I think that's a good point to be made is you hope, right, that what
yeah,
you're getting is what you're getting, but that's not always the case, right? Again, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, supplement industry not regulated by the FDA, and so often we find that the concentrations that are supposed to be in things aren't actually there. Typically, like more reputable brands, right? There's less of an issue, but honestly, so like I said, milk is a good one. Sometimes people will recommend coconut water and putting a little pinch of salt in there and maybe some honey to get some of that sugar, right? Because we need to get uh, our glycogen back in our muscles, right? That stored sugar back in our muscles after exercise. So things that are pretty, like you don't have to go out and buy a supplement. You can, or have a glass of water and a banana and a handful of nuts, right? You can get those things naturally. Oh, and so this is actually um, another thing that I found interesting. This article got me diving down a rabbit hole as I'm wont to do. And so um, when we're considering our total water intake throughout the day, it doesn't have to just come from water. And that's one of the nice things, right? So for people who struggle to drink enough water, it can be helpful. So fruits are mostly composed of water. Vegetables are mostly composed of water, and even things like yogurt, right? That still has a lot of water in it, and even like meat once we've cooked it, and breads still have about like 60 to 65% of water that they're made of, and so one of the things that's recommended, as we talk about all the time, is I love it, Christy. She said, "OMG, so milk means I can get hydrated for my lattes after all." There you go. Get some milk. Um, and so processed foods, two things. One, they tend to be more dehydrated, and two, they tend to have way, way more salt than what we'd get in our normal diet. And so, if we're eating a lot of processed foods, if we're eating a lot of if we're eating a lot of processed foods and fewer whole foods, then that means we're probably going to have much more salt than we normally need, and we're going to have to onboard more water. Versus if our diet's more whole foods, more fruits, more vegetables, then a larger percentage of that water will come through the things that we eat. And so, kind of in general, it ends up being about 50-ish% just drinking water, 20% fruits and vegetables, and then 30% other liquids, right? Milk, juice, teas, coffees, things like that, that people get some of that um, extra water from. And tea and coffee has a mild diuretic effect. Diuretic meaning it makes you pee, but typically it's not significant. There's so much water that you're drinking with it that it tends to kind of come out in the wash. So those aren't typically an issue. Alcohol definitely can lead us to being dehydrated, right? It makes us pee out more water, and so that's an area where we have to be careful. Plus the empty calories from that. But if we're having more whole foods, then we're likely to have do better with getting enough water throughout the day. Phil, I'm going to put you on the spot. Any other things? So
Mhm.
you mentioned sweat rate can change how much water. Any other things that you can think of that can change how much water that we need?
Um, I think you touched on this for just a second was diuretics, and I think it's kind of surprising how much stuff is like a bladder irritant. A lot more things are bladder irritants than what you think. So, me personally, I'm like a big time coffee drinker. So, Cameron has to pee all the time in the clinic because he drinks a lot of water, but because I drink a lot of coffee, I have to pee all the time too. But it's not for really the right reasons. Um, um, but I think monitoring, okay, what am I getting in my diet and what's a diuretic and what's going to make me pee a lot more and cause that output to shoot up a lot more than what we're intaking is really important as well. And then one thing that I forgot to touch on earlier that's really important is as we age, I'm sure what we've talked about in previous group calls is as we get older and we decrease in muscle mass and our fat mass goes up is another aspect of dehydration that's something to think about is low muscle mass can also cause someone to like respond to their thirst differently. And what I mean by that is if you have low muscle mass as you've gotten older and you don't have the strength to get to the kitchen to get water to respond to your thirst, chances are you're not going to get that water. And then you're going to get severely dehydrated a lot quicker comparative to where if you hold on to that muscle mass and you actually have the strength to get wherever you need to go independently.
I think so. It's funny because, of course, we're going to bring up muscle mass because we always bring up muscle mass and strength and power as we age, and so that is crucial, right? If we don't have enough strength, if we don't have enough muscle mass to keep moving and to catch ourselves when we fall, then yeah, things are going to be a lot worse. So we've talked a bunch about how staying hydrated as we age can become more difficult, and honestly, not even as we're older, right? It can be a problem at all ages. And so, what are some practical recommendations? Um, I took a look at this article earlier called said something to the effect of "Do we drink enough? Yes, no, and maybe." And so I really like they give a little acronym. So it's to ask yourself what, WUT. So what? So ask yourself what. So the W is weight loss, right? How much weight loss or how much weight have I lost um, during the day or overnight? So this is the best to do first thing in the morning. So you jump on the scale and how much weight have I lost? So this says that if it's greater than 1% of your body weight, That's one of the factors, right? And if you combine any two of these, then you're going to be pretty likely to be dehydrated. If it's all three, then you're going to be very likely. So the first, again, is weight loss. Is it greater than 1% of body weight? Second, urine, right? What's the color of my urine? Is it pretty clear, or is it definitely like dark yellow, kind of brownish? If it's on that dark yellow brownish, then that's a really good indicator that we need some water. And especially, again, if we've lost more than 1% of our body weight, then we're pretty likely. And then T is thirst, right? Are we thirsty? And so using these three and kind of doing it at the same time every morning. So waking up and how much weight have I lost? How dark is my urine? And how thirsty am I? Those can give us a good idea of how we're doing with our hydration on a day-to-day basis. And so that's kind of the first of the recommendations is, okay, there we go, got my face back, is ask yourself what. Two is starting out the day with some water. And so you wake up, you ask yourself what, go jump on the scale, go to the bathroom, and then just onboard some water right after you've done that, right? A glass or two, and just kind of get things started for the day. Okay, so we've got what, we've got drink a glass of water, and then as I mentioned before, just eating a diet of mostly whole foods and getting a lot of fruits and vegetables, right? A great way to get water. As I said earlier, we can shoot for a goal of half our body weight in pounds in ounces of water, right? So if I'm 100 pounds, I'm just making the math easy, then 50 ounces of water a day. I'm much more than 100 pounds, but half our body weight an hour. And then this one, I'll drop this equation in here. So this is during exercise, during activity, right? Especially if we're going to be out in the just combine those two words, heat and humidity. Those are not one word. So especially if we're out in heat or humidity, then our water needs going to be a little bit more. But if about every 15 minutes we can get, so the equation is, let's see, so it's going to be body weight divided by 30. Okay, so this is kind of this is the Galpin equation. So there's an exercise physiologist I followed for a long time. His name's Andy Galpin. This is kind of the equation that he gives for how much water we should drink during exercise. And so we take whatever our body weight is. I think this one's in kilograms, so I'll have to get back to that on you. Divide it by 30, and then that's how many ounces we need about every 15 minutes. And so it doesn't have to be exactly on the dot, but if we just kind of keep that in general, and so that's maybe like 6 to 8 ounces for most of us every 15 minutes, right? So if you got one of those, just like water bottles for the plastic water bottles from Walmart, 16 ounces usually, right? So half of those, or if you carry one like this is a 40 ouncer or different things, and so just like I said, 6 to 8 ounces every 15 to 30 minutes roughly works for most people. And then next recommendation is to, like Phil mentioned earlier, right? You want to drink back what you sweat out. So water plus those electrolytes. And so again, milk, coconut water with a little bit of salt and some honey mixed in can be a really great way too. But just making sure that you're getting the water and those electrolytes. Very unlikely to happen to any of you, but you've probably heard in the news over the years about they call it water intoxication. So it's called hyponatremia. It means that you don't have enough sodium in your cells, and you get big problems, right? And it's typically not an issue of you losing too much salt or you eat too little salt. It's just you onboarded too much water too quick. So I think it was in 2000. The story I remember was like around 2007, and this lady died trying to win an Xbox for her sons. It was a radio competition, and who could drink the most water in whatever time period. And anyway, so on the high end of water, right? There's a toxic dose for almost everything. So, but honestly, probably not a problem for most of us because most of us don't get enough water. And so those are kind of the main recommendations. And if we stick to those, then we'll probably do pretty good. But I really like that what, because I think it's a really easy question to ask ourselves. Most of us have access to a scale. We can look at our urine and we know how thirsty we are. So it's a really good gauge of kind of where we're at, and can give us some room to improve there. Any final thoughts or any questions, Phil? Or
Yeah, no, I really like that what diagram right here. I think that's an awesome checklist to kind of do when you first wake up in the morning. I've never seen that before, and I really like that. Yeah, so but other than that, nothing to add on my end. I think you summed everything up, kind of everything that I was thinking. So perfect job on that. Yeah.
awesome. Well, it's past 6 already, so that's all we got for tonight. I'll drop a little thing in the probably the general convo and questions room that gives some basic hit points to what we talked about today. And otherwise, we'll catch you on the call on Thursday. Thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Body Smart podcast. Join us in the Body Smart community on Facebook to share your successes or ask a question for our next episode. Now get out there and take the next step toward living your active lifestyle.